one of the challenges for the church, and this is where churches like Mars Hill were actually exceptionally successful, is being able to speak into the culture at the moment in a language and style that the culture understands so that they're heard. But all of this is saying the massive danger of this is to kind of be subsumed by the culture. And there's that tension point that everybody in Christian media is dealing with. I mean, if you look like you walked out of an Amish community yesterday, there's not a good chance that people are going to watch what you produce. But on the other hand, if you're just reflecting the culture, what good is that? So is there anything that you've picked up in how to keep that balance?
Again, I think it comes back to virtue, right? Like, because the emphasis at Mars that was so powerful was, like you said, they were, the whole idea of Mars Hill was taking, the Apostle Paul's work in Acts 17 and saying, here are the things in the culture that you value, and here's the way they point us to Jesus. And I think, the mission of the church since the Jesus movement has had that sort of flavor in ways that have been really powerful. But I think there's a poverty there in the cultivation of wisdom, in the cultivation of character. I just don't think we have a depth understanding of how to make those things happen in the church. And, you hear the heartbeat of a Eugene Peterson or a Marva Dawn or, Dallas Willard and Richard Foster. Like those are alarm bells that people have been sounding for decades now. And I think in some ways we're just sort of seeing the chickens come home to roost on those kinds of problems.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter how spectacular you are. If your character is flawed, at some point it's going to come unglued.
That's right. And I mean, that's, Jesus talked about it all the time, right? Like you build your house on the sand, bad things are going to happen. And, there's the saying as well, character is destiny. It's who you are at your core is eventually going to come to the surface.
Yeah.
Rich Plass, his phrase that always haunted me is, it's just the phrase, it gets out. And whatever it is that's in you, it gets out eventually. What makes a guy a great church planter who can pioneer something, do the grind, push through the resistance, make a big thing happen, does not necessarily make him a great institutional leader for the long term. It's the old saying, if you're a hammer, everything becomes a nail. If you look at wisdom traditions and all kinds of, religious communities, particularly the Christian tradition, part of what you see in that tradition is there's something about, youthful energy where you have to sort of go out and conquer the world in whatever sense that is. But there comes a time where, whether it's sin or suffering or something else, you reach this point where God calls you to die to self and to re-examine those things. I think we live in a time that doesn't value that second stage in life. Richard Rohr has talked about this, Rich Plass and Jim Cofield, who are some evangelical leaders that work with pastors. They talk about this all the time. We don't value that transition to the second half of life because it looks like you lost your edge.